What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Amazon's remake of Roadhouse, which dropped today. And the reason I'm specifying Amazon is that it feels precisely like the kind of watered-down product or byproduct of when a tech giant goes out of their way to drain a story of any of the ingredients that a person might enjoy. And if you want to know what Roadhouse looks like or sounds like without any great dialogue, well, here it is. Or if you want to see Roadhouse without any memorable characters or without any sex appeal of any kind, unless you count the inside of Conor McGregor's butt crack, then by all means, watch this watered-down, lifeless version of Roadhouse. And as tempting as it would be just to use this review as a backdoor opportunity to review the 1989 classic, I'm way ahead of you, and I'm including a link in the description below to a video interview with David Lambert, where we ranted and raved about the original for quite some time. For my money, the original is a bona fide classic, and I say that without a hint of irony. I'm not one of those douchebags who likes to make fun of Roadhouse just because the story's full of shit kickers and redneck peckerwoods. I love it because of the shit kickers and redneck peckerwoods. It even goes so far as to say that if the biggest hillbilly you've ever met doesn't fall in love with any version of Roadhouse, well, then they're doing it wrong. And don't get me wrong, I've seen and enjoyed many of Doug Liman's movies, and no one can deny that Jake Gyllenhaal clearly was incredibly dedicated to this role. He's completely shredded, and it looks like he participated in as many stunts as he was allowed to do. But if your version of Roadhouse doesn't have lines of dialogue where mothers suddenly feel compelled to cover the ears of their children, well, then you're doing it wrong.
You want to fight, dickless?
I sure ain't gonna show you my dick.
Or if your version of Roadhouse doesn't feature people skinny dipping or screwing against a wall while listening to Otis Redding's These Arms of Mine, well, then you're doing it wrong. And if your version of Roadhouse doesn't feature legendary character actors like Sam Elliott and Ben Gazzara, then you're doing it wrong. But the reason people are still talking about Roadhouse 35 years later is because it's outrageous, it's vulgar, it's hilarious. It's basically what happens when the producer of Die Hard decides to make the greatest drive-in movie ever made. And if you soften any of the ingredients involved in the original Roadhouse, well, then it ain't Roadhouse. But let's slow down for a second and start with a few positives, because I had a giant temper tantrum earlier talking about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and I only have enough energy in my system for one temper tantrum per day, so I'm going to try to remain very calm and collected as I explain why I did not enjoy this new remake. So let's start with Jake Gyllenhaal, who's the best part of the movie by far. He's very different from Patrick Swayze, and his approach to the character, or I should say the writer's approach to the character, is totally different. Like, there's none of that, kind of philosophical, peaceful warrior stuff here. Jake Gyllenhaal is playing a character who is a retired MMA fighter. He used to fight in the UFC. And he's got a bit of a mean streak where he tries to keep things nice and friendly, because he knows that when he goes to the dark side and when he finally is provoked to the point where he goes over a certain line in his head, well, then he's capable of really horrible things. So it's a different interpretation of the character of Dalton. But, I mean, the dude, I don't know what he's eating or what he's doing for his fitness routine, but he looks fantastic with his shirt off. I don't know if he'd ever actually, win in an amateur fight or anything like that, but, what was that boxing movie he did a couple years ago? Maybe even 10 years ago. But he's no stranger to getting completely fucking shredded for his roles, but he doesn't have any actors really to interact with. I mean, he's got one or two scenes with Joaquim de Almeida, who's always been a great character actor for the last couple decades. Maybe he's not as good as someone like Ben Gazzara or Sam Elliott, but he's fucking good. I've seen him in a million movies. But an actor is only as good as their ensemble cast. And an actor needs, almost like a fighter who's a good counterpuncher, where an actor needs to be able to react to what the other actors are giving them. And Daniela Melchior, while she's very easy on the eyes, and I thought she was by far my favorite character in The Suicide Squad by James Gunn. I mean, she was, I think, the best Hollywood movie to date to take advantage of her talents by far is The Suicide Squad. And she's a welcome addition to this, but her part is so underwritten. Once again, Dalton can only be Dalton if he has cool characters that he can kind of, lock horns with or match wits with or make love to or whatever the case might be. It's just a very thin, pathetic screenplay written by Anthony Bagarossi, Chuck Mondry, and R. Lance Hill. Whatever they've written in the past or whatever they will write in the future, well, I will look at it slightly more suspiciously, because they've lost any and all kind of credit in the bank they might have had with me. And if somebody were to put a gun to my head and order me to say something else nice about the movie, I would say, without specifying which character, there's a death scene at the end which has some cool choreography in terms of the finishing moves before that person goes down. But I have to admit, was kind of disappointed by the action. I feel like if you're making a Roadhouse movie, first and foremost, the action needs to be incredible. Like Benny the Jet Urquidez was brought in to do the choreography and to train Patrick Swayze for the first one. And not only was Benny the Jet Urquidez like a world-class kickboxer who'd competed in full contact sports around the world, he also was a fucking badass like stuntman / actor who had gone to town with Jackie Chan and Meals on Wheels and a few other movies. He's a fucking badass. Bringing in Urquidez for the original Roadhouse was one of the best creative decisions that they made. It just made everybody up their game. And I just feel like nobody on this movie appears to be, or at least no one was trying to make the whole movie kind of up their game. Like producer Joel Silver on the original, he knew how to kind of marshal all these ingredients and all this talent and all this crew and make sure that all their energies were being directed in the most like entertaining fashion humanly possible. But so much of this movie is just boring, like lame jokes and kind of predictable fight scenes. Like every fight scene kind of looks and feels the same. They all have the exact same kind of camera angles. They do this thing where they kind of swing from left to right and they're kind of swooping in and around, almost like the camera's like ducking punches and that sort of thing. But the fights start to feel very interchangeable and very bland very quickly. And they do this weird thing where you could tell they were trying to make the punches feel more impactful. But all the actors are doing this thing where they throw a punch and at the last second they kind of slow down and kind of smush their hand into the person's face. I'm like, that looks terrible. Just let them like swing their head. At least it looks like they're getting hit. I mean, I watch a ton of combat sports, specifically MMA. No one ever gets like kind of their face kind of mushed gently before they go, oh, you got me. I mean, just anyway, I was not a fan of the action in this at all. And speaking of the action, not even the notorious Conor McGregor can make me get really invested in the action scenes. Honestly, I'd rather watch any fight from his UFC career than this movie. Even the brief ones, like in his rematch with Dustin Poirier, where his leg was shattered in savage fashion. He might say, oh, it was broken from kicking you so much and I kind of stepped on it wrong. Like, whatever the reasons why his leg broke, but that was more exciting. Or watching him getting his ass kicked by Khabib Nurmagomedov, that was more exciting. But I was there at Madison Square Garden in 2016 when Conor McGregor beat Eddie Alvarez and became a champ. He still had his featherweight belt, from his 145-pound belt, but he also at the same time was earning or gaining or winning the 155-pound belt. And that was glorious. I mean, I remember he just sat up on the top of the octagon and said, I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to absolutely nobody. And everybody screamed and cheered, and we all went out to bars afterwards. And it was just it was a great evening in New York, and it's incredible. That was 7.5 years ago. Conor has won one fight since then. He beat Donald Cerrone after he took a little hiatus from MMA to box Floyd Mayweather Jr., which he didn't win that fight either. But yeah, Conor has fallen on hard times, not in terms of his wallet. He's probably the most successful fighter from MMA ever in terms of like total money earned. And if you want to judge the success of a career by the amount of money you make, well, Conor is the clear front runner. And judging by his size and his bulk in this movie, he's either eating out at a lot of expensive restaurants or, putting the occasional injection right into his glorious buttocks to jack up those muscles. The idea of him ever making 155 or 145 where he started ever again, that's impossible. The dude is real big now. And yeah, what can we say about his acting? Conor's a little bit one note. I mean, if you've seen his commercials for Proper Number 12 Irish Whiskey, he kind of says every line in the movie just like those commercials. Then occasionally we'll kind of go and get a little crazy. But I guess I can applaud them for the idea of bringing in Conor McGregor, but you need to give him crazy, outrageous shit to say. Like, if the villain's not saying, I used to fuck guys like you back in prison.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.
Well, then he's not as scary or as entertaining or just ridiculous as some of the villains you might find in the original Roadhouse from 1989. But as far as acting goes, I must acknowledge that Conor McGregor comes across like his fellow Irishman, Cillian Murphy, in comparison to some of the other actors in this movie. There are a lot of actors in this movie where I guess the kindest way to describe it is that they are amateur. They are inexperienced. I mean, when it comes to drama, they're terrible. And you can tell, did you just get one take, or have you never acted before? Like, what's going on here? But just like these weird, kind of hollow line readings, totally devoid of any sort of personality. It's like, did y'all just go to a bar and say, whoever's here right now, just stay. You're now the cast of the 2024 remake of Roadhouse. It was just, it was atrocious. I couldn't believe how bad most of the actors were. Like the character that Dalton is working for. What is he? I'm not even going to name the actress because the character is named Frankie. But every time she spoke, I was like, is this your first time doing this? Because you're not bringing the heat. Jake Gyllenhaal, he's a real deal actor. I mean, some people might look down upon him for some other acting choices or some decisions he's made along the way. But if you watch a movie like Zodiac or if you watch a movie like Prisoners, you'll recognize, holy shit, like Jake Gyllenhaal, he packs the gear. He's a real deal actor. But if we had to zero in on the biggest Achilles heel or the biggest weakness of this movie, it has to be the screenplay. And I knew we were in trouble from the very first scene onward, where we see Dalton at this kind of underground fight club where just the way that this fight is being arranged or set up doesn't even make sense, where you have this one guy, almost like a King of the Hill scenario or like a Royal Rumble scenario from wrestling, where he's in the pit and people enter and they get one at a time. He's taking them out. And basically at the end of the night, whoever is left standing walks home with the bag. But I'm like, well, then if that's the incentive structure you've created for your fighters, no fighter's ever going to be the first to go in. They're going to wait for the very last turn so they're fresh and the other person's tired with sore knuckles and broken bones and that sort of thing. And they'll walk away with the bag. If you can't believe the world in which the story takes place, and as strange as it might sound, I can believe the world of Roadhouse in 1989 because it's true unto itself. It just has to be consistent with whatever world the filmmakers are trying to create. But because this movie tries to bring in some elements from the real world, they actually shot a fight and weigh in like an actual UFC event in order to get all that incredible production value, where you see Jake Gyllenhaal walking out through the crowd, the lights flashing. We got Bruce Buffer in there doing his usual routine. I mean, it feels, if you're going for that UFC authenticity, then you have to try to make all the rules and mechanics of combat sports make sense to combat sports enthusiasts. Otherwise, they're just going to be calling bullshit the whole movie. And if you're putting Conor McGregor in your movie, clearly you're hoping that some fans of MMA are going to watch the flick. And that's always the riddle with these kinds of movies. Can you make it in a way or choreograph it in a way or add enough ingredients where it's more exciting and more compelling to watch this over a UFC pay-per-view or even one of the free cards, like one of the UFC fight nights? And very few action movies are at that level. Every once in a while, one will come along, you're like, all right, goddamn, this is a fucking movie, like a movie like The Night Comes For Us, where it's got superb filmmaking in addition to just jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring choreography. Or if you can't do that, give us some sex scenes. Like the first Roadhouse, we have both Kelly Lynch as well as Julie Michaels giving us some of the most jaw-dropping, Hall of Fame, just awe-inspiring nude scenes ever. And it's not because they're revealing. I mean, they don't even reveal that much, but they're filmed in a way where they're just so sexy and so exciting and so provocative. And yeah, I can watch those scenes from Roadhouse anytime. The only nudity in this movie, and this is a spoiler, but the only nudity is Conor McGregor's butt crack. And the way he walks, if people know him from his career as a fighter, he has this kind of way where he kind of hunches his shoulders over and his legs are very wide apart. So because the camera's right behind him, we're basically looking in great detail up into his nether regions. And I've watched all of Conor McGregor's fights. I've never felt compelled to look at that part of his anatomy, his taint, his runway, or as my sister calls it, the nacho ass, nacho dick. I've never felt compelled to look at the nacho of Conor McGregor, but now I've seen it, and I'm sure that MMA fans will be using it in memes for the rest of his career. But what else can we get into? Let's talk about the Roadhouse itself, which is the locale's been changed to the Florida Keys. And I do say Florida. I grew up in an environment where everybody around me pronounces it Florida. I know most people from Florida pronounce it Florida. However, the villain of this movie, one of the only lines that I like this entire movie, when Billy Magnuson, who plays Ben Brandt, pronounced it as Florida, I was like, all right, there's at least one person who probably grew up in an environment similar to mine where they pronounce it Florida. And for some reason, people in the UK refer to it as Florida as well. I don't know where the discrepancy emerged. But if a sister pronounces it Florida, everybody makes fun of her for that. But it's probably should be the reverse. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The Florida Keys is a perfect environment. I mean, for people who've been to Florida, it's the Wild Wild West. I know it's not the Wild Wild West, but in a lot of ways it does feel like the Wild Wild West when it comes to strip clubs and pill popping and snorting in lines and just it's a crazy over-the-top state with its own culture or many cultures within, because obviously you got the Cuban thing going on in Miami, but then you got some serious hillbillies up in the panhandle of Florida. You have a lot of different kind of conflicting cultures all bumping into each other, and they all like to get shit-faced, and they all like to screw and listen to music and party. If you like to party, places like Miami and Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach and all those places, go there. I promise you will have a good time. but as most people know, when it comes to Florida, one of the main industries there is real estate development and or flipping real estate, and that's part of like the main, I guess, gist of the story. You have a bad guy who's basically trying to buy up a lot of property, build up a giant resort. I mean, the Florida Keys, I haven't been there since like 1999 or 2000. It can be a little rustic. I mean, it's a lot of like palm trees and thatched roof huts and that sort of thing, but that's what people want. That's why Ernest Hemingway loved smoking cigars and drinking and writing down there and that sort of thing. Florida Keys have their own atmosphere, but Billy Magnuson's character has dreams of building, a giant theme park or resort empire and make vast sums of money. And I guess he's okay as the villain, but the way he's written, he's so stupid and so erratic and so clumsy. Like, he doesn't come across as somebody who could even answer an email, much less be the Machiavellian bad guy kind of orchestrating or kind of hiring all these goons to do his bidding. Whereas with Ben Gazzara in the first, from the moment you see him driving down the road, singing along as he's swerving on the road, like you believe him as the villain, and he's an incredibly compelling villain. Billy Magnuson, I've liked him in some other stuff, but they did him a disservice the way they wrote this particular villain, because I didn't buy him for a second. And one thing that's totally missing from this movie, which I think is a critical misstep on their part, there's no mentor/buddy relationship with Wade Garrett. And that was a huge part of what gave the original movie its heart and its soul. It's the fact that Dalton's a stud, but the best in the business is Wade. But what's great about the arrival of Wade Garrett on the scene at the Double Deuce, or the Double Douche as he pronounces it in the original film, when he steps onto the scene, the whole movie kind of kicks it up a notch. Suddenly the battles become more ferocious, the stakes are a little higher, buildings are getting blown up, people are getting their throats ripped out, all this stuff. Like, because Wade Garrett is such a stud and such a badass, immediately he and Dalton together become such a huge threat that Brad Wesley has to kind of up his game and make things a lot more savage and a lot more ruthless. And my favorite scene of the original Roadhouse is a situation where you have Brad Wesley in the Double Deuce, like, Julie Michaels is dancing and giving everybody hard-ons and that sort of thing, but suddenly this battle royale erupts where we've got basically all the main characters throwing down. Was it Marshall Teague or Mick Teague? I always get iffy on the name of the bad guy in the original. Hang on, I've got it right here. He was even kind of Marshall R. Teague, who liked one of my tweets about Roadhouse recently. But once we have Jimmy Reno and Brad Wesley and basically all the major characters of the story all interacting at the Double Deuce at the same time, that's where the movie really just finds its sweet spot. It's the peak of the movie. This movie doesn't have a single scene that comes anywhere close to that, where like the music and the fights and the sex appeal are all coming together. I mean, the music in this is atrocious. They have a saxophone player with a man bun playing in the Roadhouse. I'm sorry, like, give me some guys with like scars on their faces or burns or horrible tattoos. Like, make it rough. When you see a skinny kind of metrosexual white guy playing the saxophone with his man bun, like, it does not make the place feel tough or dangerous at all. And that was part of the joy. The first one was watching the Double Deuce go from this place where you just basically go to get your throat cut to seeing it slowly evolve into a place where people can go and have a nice time. Or as Patrick Swayze told one of the villains, you're too stupid to have a good time. And he drags him outside and that sort of thing. So yeah, long story short, everything that was entertaining in the first one is missing from this movie. And I'm sure a lot of the people involved had the best of intentions. And Doug Liman, we all know he can deliver a good movie under the right circumstances, but maybe Amazon wasn't the right home for this production. It's funny, Amazon has this weird attitude where some of their shows and some of their movies feel so authentic and so pure, and others just feel so compromised by what feels like kind of soft and fuzzy or soft and friendly studio meddling, where they just try to take all the danger, all the violence, all the nudity out of everything, unless it's Conor McGregor's butt crack. I'm still haven't fully recovered. So yeah, I thought the movie fucking sucked, and I don't recommend it. And if you're a giant fan of Danielle Melchior, fine, like, have a look-see, but her part was horribly underwritten. Everything about this movie was underwritten, so it's like, even if you have cool stars and you've got, like, the budget, if you don't have a good screenplay, you're basically dead at the starting gate. But is there anything else in my notes that I want to get into, or is it time just to wrap this sucker up? You know what? I've been waiting for weeks to play this new game, Dragon's Dogma 2. I'm dying to play it, and it just finished downloading on my PC, so it's ready to rock. I'm going to wrap this video up and just say that what I hope to do in a couple days is come back with a review of Dragon's Dogma 2. I'll also be coming back with a box office breakdown for this weekend as well. So more videos on the horizon, but today was a triple upload day, and I'm ready to hang it up and kill some bad guys. So thank you so much for listening. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and be sure to listen to my podcast linked down below where I talked about the original Roadhouse at great length. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.